Good morning, afternoon, or evening to you all. I hope you are having a good day, getting some fresh air and activity, eating your fruits and vegetables, and taking good care of yourself. Today's lesson is about the writing process, looking at some college-level strategies to approach pre-writing, writing, and rewriting. Some topics that we're going to cover in today's agenda are pre-writing topics that cover getting prepared, brainstorming and outlining, writing topics like moving beyond the basics, using dynamic hooks and closers, and persuading your audience with influential language. Next, we'll look at rewriting, tips to revise, edit, publish your work, and avoid plagiarism. So get out your notes, watch along and take notes. Pause the video at any time to ask questions, check your understanding, or maybe even share out an example. And before we begin, don't be mistaken. The agenda makes it look like writing is a neat procession from step to step, one thing after the other, but the writing process is going to cycle back and forth throughout all of these phases at the same time. For example, when you are in the writing phase, you're still going to continue brainstorming, outlining, checking your materials. When you are in the writing phase, you're going to be already making moves to revise and edit and avoid plagiarism. So it's not a neat list, everything separated out. In fact, it becomes much messier and much more involved as we go. So with that being said, let's get started. First, we're going to look at getting prepared, strategies to focus on the prompt and review your materials. Firstly, when we're ready to focus on that prompt, we need to carefully read the prompt to notice controlling verbs. These are the words telling us what we are supposed to do. Things like summarize, paraphrase, explain, respond, analyze, integrate, interpret, things like that. We also want to understand the limits of this assignment. What is the due date, or what is the time limit? How many words or pages should we be creating? What number of sources do we need to use? Also, it's helpful to break the assignment into sections for each task, breaking down a large assignment into a list of smaller tasks to complete. Always ask questions and check your comprehension when you receive an essay prompt. Ask for different explanations if needed. Check your understanding to be sure you're on the right page. Once you have a clear understanding of the prompt, you're going to be ready to review and gather up your materials. This means you want to study the resources you already have, such as annotated readings, reading notes from a separate page, lesson notes or lesson Q&As, discussion notes, the things that you've already been talking about. Finally, previous assignment feedback. So if you turned in a short writing and you got a little critique, you'll want to bring that into your larger writing assignment. Think about which topics, interests, and ideas stood out to you during the unit that you've been studying leading up to that essay assignment. Once you're feeling prepared, you will really want to begin that pre-writing process that always begins with some brainstorming and outlining. First of all, during the brainstorming process, you want to stay open-minded, permissive, and free thinking. Anything goes. Free write is a technique of brainstorming where you begin to answer the prompt by simply typing, voice recording, or handwriting your thoughts with no restrictions at all. One way that this kind of can be termed also is brain dumping, although I wouldn't want to look for the PowerPoint image for that concept. We're going to stick with brainstorming today. Another technique is clustering. This could also be called mind mapping. You develop a map or a web of topics and themes that might help you answer the prompt. Then from there, you add details, quotes, and examples to each area in your cluster. One way I like to practice clustering in the digital workspace is by using Padlet.com as a tool to organize my topics, themes, and supporting details when I need to write an assignment. Once you have a general brainstorm prepared, you're going to move into outlining. At this time, you want to stay focused, exclusive, and structured with your thinking. You want to organize out your specific subtopics. These are those focus areas or groups of ideas that will help you respond to each part of the prompt. You want to organize your evidence, gathering quotes, images, or details that will help you develop each of those subtopics. Then you want to work out your claims, clearly stating your overall thought for each subtopic that you wish to cover. At this point, if you look down at your notes and you have any questions about getting prepared, understanding the prompt, reviewing your materials, brainstorming, or outlining, pause the video and share your questions, comments, and thoughts in the discussion replies. Next, we're going to move on to the topic of writing. These are going to be college level strategies for moving beyond the basics. By this point, we all know the basic components of a complete rough draft. First of all, there is no wrong way to get to that complete first draft, as long as it includes the major elements of your paper, such as the thesis statement, topic sentence claims, supporting details, analytic commentary, works cited page, boom, boom, boom. In this lesson, we're going to move a little bit beyond those basic ingredients to start looking at ways that we can really use our writing to impact the audience. So let's take a look at some dynamic hooks, persuasive details, and inspiring closers. First of all, you want to use your hook to set the tone for your paper. This involves a little bit of creative and critical thinking to choose an appropriate hook for the purpose of your writing and the audience you are addressing. For example, if you're writing a narrative or a personal essay, you might have a hook that shares an anecdotal story. Anecdotal just means like this one time that this happened. Maybe a descriptive scene. So if you want to really like draw the reader in to see things from your perspective, maybe there's chaos in your house, or maybe it's, a dark night and you're up late studying. Whatever the topic of your essay, you'll use a appropriate hook. Another kind of go-to for a personal essay is a famous quote that's like maybe inspirational, but I consider that more on the basic side of things. It doesn't take that much creative thinking. Similarly, if you're making a persuasive argument or an opinion essay, you might want to start out with a bold or a shocking statement, like an extreme stance on your opinion or on your overall argument. You want to maybe start with a rhetorical question, asking the reader maybe some ways to think about your topic from an interesting or out-of-the-box perspective. Maybe you're going to use sarcasm or irony in this question. Or another kind of common opening for argument or persuasion is summarizing a standard viewpoint. So on the surface level, everyone might easily believe this is the case, but actually I'm going to show you that that's not true. That's a very common, somewhat on the basic side, but also a really good go-to for an argument. Another common type of essay that we get in college is the research paper or the scholarly paper. One really strong hook is to introduce and define a core concept, a core idea that really plays as an anchor in the topic that you researched about. So introducing and defining a concept. Also escalating or dramatizing a prediction. Like, if we don't take this seriously, the fate of the world is, going to go up in flames. Or similar to that is an urgent problem. Like, people across the world are being plagued by X, Y, and Z, and it's time for that to end. So some of these type of dramatic introductions to the theme, the topic, and the perspective that you're about to research. So those are some fun and interesting hooks that you might use. And of course, there's a way to mix and match using that creative and critical thinking to make it your own. Once you have the hook out of the way and you're getting into your writing, we're going to look at some strategies to really persuade your audience to come into your point of view. There are a number of ways to do this using word choices and sentence styles that influence your readers on a variety of different levels. One of those levels is logic and reasoning. And we already know that you can appeal to the sense of logic and reasoning by using clear patterns, clear conjunctions to guide the reader's thinking and reasoning process. Lead them step by step through your ideas and your conclusions. Another way is to appeal to your own authority, your sense of authority on this topic, so your reader can trust you. You've done strong research, you have meaningful quotations from reputable sources, and you're showing how your ideas link to that research. Your opinion is now presented on equal footing to the research that you're pulling from. And another go-to persuasive technique is to appeal to emotion. One way to do this is analyzing the consequences or the ethical values of the topics that you're getting into, really pinning on your reader's sense of right and wrong, good and bad, okay and not okay. You might also appeal to emotion by using word choice or sentence styles that activate a sense of fear, anxiety, outrage, or hope, resolution, and inspiration on behalf of your readers. So these are the three basic categories for influencing your readers: logic, authority, and emotion. This is also known as logos, ethos, and pathos, which is something that you'll cover when you move out of English 122 into your critical thinking courses. So after you have really taken charge of the mood and the tone of your argument, you're probably ready to start making those closers. Again, you're going to use creative and critical thinking to choose powerful closing statements that inspire your reader. There are a number of go-to techniques for accomplishing this. One of them is the call to action, where you urge your readers to take specific actions, adopt specific values, attitudes, or perspectives that coordinate with your opinion about the topic you've been researching. There's also dramatic forecast, predicting the fate of society or humanity if we fail or if we succeed in the issues of your paper. So this could be anything from, apocalypse to utopia, depending on what aspect you are emphasizing. So if the tone of your paper was doom and gloom, you might want to do end on a positive note, like we don't have to fall into these traps. There's a way forward, something like that. And then also a common one is follow-up research. So opening up the conversation to further issues and related problems that we need to tackle next. So kind of saying like, thanks for joining me on this discussion, readers, but don't think that our work here is done. There are still multiple other angles that we need to take up in order to really X, Y, or Z, whatever your topic that you're arguing about is. Motioning to the idea that there is still progress to be made. So take a look at your notes that you have written down so far. Maybe pause the video and let's talk more about some of those hooks, impactful language, and closers that you might want to use to inspire your readers as you begin writing. Next, we'll move on to some strategies for the rewriting process. These are techniques, tips, and skills to revise and edit once you have a draft in place. So first of all, you always want to start with revising, and that means making big picture changes. I always recommend that when you're ready to move from your rough draft to your final draft, review that prompt and, if possible, review the rubric to ensure that you are really addressing each requirement. Then you want to review and correct the major elements of your paper. Make sure your thesis is complete and clearly stated. Make sure that you have a really compelling introduction and conclusion. Make sure that your body paragraphs fully include claims, evidence, analysis. Make sure that you have effective transitions and check that your works cited page is complete. Another way to revise or make big picture changes is to rearrange the flow of your body paragraphs into a logical order. That means take a look and see if it's more powerful to talk about one of your topics before another. Maybe you have compare, contrast. Maybe you have problem, solution. Maybe you have cause, effect, significance, something like that. So you don't want to have a paper where you're talking about, here's a way to solve this problem. By the way, it actually is a problem. That's not a logical flow. So take those paragraphs and arrange them in the best possible pattern. And then really check to see if your body paragraphs truly match your thesis. If your argument doesn't match up with your thesis, you either need to change your argument or change your thesis. In my point of view and in my experience, it is always easier to go back into your thesis statement and change it so that it represents the argument that you've actually advanced. That's a lot easier and a lot quicker than reviewing your entire argument. So once you have big picture changes out of the way, you'll be ready to, take a break, step away from your writing, come back and make those fine detailed changes. I have some tips for noticing where changes need to be taken. So first, read your paper out loud. And yes, it's a little cringy, it's a little awkward, but it will help you really notice fragments or run-on sentences, missing conjunctions, repetitive words or phrases, and awkward or confusing sentence structures. If you're reading and you find yourself you're having to gasp for breath to finish a sentence, you might be dealing with a run-on sentence. You might need to add a conjunction and a comma to break those ideas up, or you might need to separate your ideas into their own sentences. If you read a sentence and it kind of just suddenly stops, you might be dealing with a fragment sentence that needs to be completed. If you find yourself saying over and over and over again the same words, the same phrases, or if you find that you just said something but you don't even know what it means, these are all keys that you need to edit and fine-tune those sentences. And this is something that we often skip over when we remain silently reading in our heads. Another technique is to read your paper from the last paragraph to the first paragraph. So starting at the last paragraph and then moving up paragraph by paragraph. And taking it out of order defamiliarizes the expectation of what you're going to encounter. And this helps you notice if you have stale verbs, stale nouns, and unclear pronouns. So you may have started your paper with maybe a pronoun, and now you're saying it, this, that, it, this, that. But if you get to the end of the paper, you might not know what you're referring back to. Also, it might help you pay attention to vague words. So one example of a stale noun that we see a lot in college writing is this reading says, this text says. But it's so much more powerful to say like, this interview worries about, or this report insists that, things like that. So verbs and nouns that elevate your writing. And then always end out your fine detail editing by making sure that your works cited page is alphabetized and correctly formatted. Take a look at your notes for your tips on revising and editing. Pause the video if you want to share questions, comments, thoughts, or further discussion about these tips and strategies. Finally, we're going to end with 2 more tips for what you need to do right before you turn in your paper. So in college classes, our essays aren't usually published per se, but we still need to make sure that all of these details are correct before you submit your work. So number 1, is it formatted correctly? Number 2, is your name and class information on there? And number 3, is there a creative title? Did you label your project essay number 1? You need to rethink that and give it a creative title that expresses your theme and perspective. Essays for this class are all going to be submitted through the Turnitin app to check for both plagiarism and AI fabrication. So this does a pretty good job of checking to see if you have copy pasted any information from the web. And Turnitin is now developing new software to detect patterns that are common in generative text. Another just tip that I'll throw out there that I don't have on the presentation is that for the most part, when I have students who use, essay writing tools, like, you type in the prompt and then the tool spits back out your essay for you, I feel like the most anyone can ever really get from those projects is around a D, because the internet or the machine is not skilled at responding to evidence. It is not skilled at analyzing evidence. So those are the 2 huge elements of writing craft that you cannot replace with a machine. All right, so after you check that everything is formatted, all your T's are crossed, your I's are dotted, you also want to double check to remember that you have not plagiarized anything. So one way to do this is to really keep a diligent record of all of the resources that you consult during your research. This includes Wikipedia pages, YouTube videos, homework help websites, images, etc. If you looked at it, write it down in a note section so that you can cite it at the end. Also, when you're taking notes, clearly indicate quotations in your notes so that later you don't confuse ideas that you borrowed for ideas that you actually came up with. Also, one key thing is if you are fully integrating every borrowed word, phrase, or sentence by unpacking those ideas, then you kind of know for yourself that you didn't plagiarize. You didn't use those words as a substitute for your own thinking. And then at the end, accurately record all of the sources in a works cited or works consulted page. This brings us to the end of our lesson today. Look back at your notes if you see the areas about, finishing up your paper before you turn it in, avoiding plagiarism, or even moving back into the rewriting, writing, and pre-writing processes. Let me know if you have any questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, anything that stood out to you. And before we leave, I will just let you know You shouldn't expect to perfect all of these processes all at once. For most of us, this level of writing is going to be new. So we will practice and grow throughout the rest of the semester. These aren't the standards that we need to hit right out of the gate when we write our next project. So with that, I will see you guys on the next one, and don't forget to do your homework. Take care.